I'm Panagiotis Kriaris. I was very happy to have been hosted by Tarek on Voices of the Future, one of the most engaging discussions I had lately.
Today, we're taking you to Europe to talk about the future of fintech, to talk about all of the shifts and changes that are taking place in this fast-moving space of fintech and financial services. And we have no better person that I could think of who I have been following religiously online, and that is Panagiotis Kriaris from Austria. Panagiotis, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here.
Panagiotis, tell us about yourself, your position, who you are, where you come from, and what are you doing today?
Yeah, sure. So as you said, I'm Panagiotis Kriaris. I'm originally coming from Greece. I live in Vienna. I have, so my entire career has been spent on financial services. So I have a background in banking, in payments, in fintech for the past many years. I usually say I'm lucky enough to have been on both sides of the fence. So I understand a bit both sides. I've always been on the business side, but with a strong also product and technical focus. I mean, nowadays you cannot really do business if you're not into this kind of things. And I work for a payments company, a fintech called Unzer. It's basically a European player.
Tell us from the early days, where did you graduate? What were your passions when you were a young person? Did you expect 20 years ago that you will be where you are today? What were your dreams? What were your passions at that time?
Yeah, so I was actually, so I went to the university to study economics and business administration, and then I did an MBA. And to be honest, I always knew that it's, my career is gonna have to do something with finance, with economics. I couldn't specify back at the time what this would be, but I was always interested in business and in reading stuff and understanding how things are working and how the economy is moving. So I would say that was something that you could identify early on, as far as I'm concerned. But if you ask me, for example, I mean, I remember somebody was asking me when I was about to finish university, what you're gonna do in the next years. And I think the last thing that I would say would be banking or finance or payments. To be honest, this was the last thing on my mind, because it was always connected to something which is very complicated and it's not easy to deal with. So it was not, let's say, my first priority back then.
I understand that, Panagiotis, and again I find this, that we are, as young people in our teens, we at 12, 13, 14, we have to decide for the rest of our lives. Do we go science? Do we go maths? Do we go biology, physics, whatever? And we have no idea. And 8, 9 out of 10 people that I meet end up doing things that they were not planning to do, and they find themselves in a different space. And I think that is a lesson and a learning for all of us, is not to be too stuck with our children, not to be too stuck at a young age, and follow passion. What do you think about following passion for people?
Exactly. I mean, you're spot on, I would say, because at the end of the day, no matter how much money you earn, no matter what you do, at the end of the day, you have to wake up. And when you wake up, you have to say, okay, today I'm gonna do A, B, C, D. And I love doing this stuff. I look forward to doing this stuff. So it has to be about passion, right? If you don't like the stuff that you're doing, you can never be good at what you do. So that's why it's so important that you make a choice that is a good one for you. And a choice is always a personal thing, right? So for you, what I personally like might not be attractive enough for you, and vice versa, right? And I think at some point we also have to be open enough to say, okay, I want to make a pivot, for example, right? I mean, some people throughout their career, their lifetime, they decide, okay, I've done so much of this, and now I want to do something different. How do I do this, right? And I always say that if you are ready to spend the time and make the effort, nothing is impossible.
Yeah. It's really important, Panagiotis, to reinvent ourselves, because in this fast changing, highly dynamic, exponential world that we're living in, if you're not ready to pivot and if you're not ready to reinvent ourselves, we will be lost. Just recently, to share a story, last week, I was talking to a lot of young people. I mentor a lot of startups and students and so on. And I said something and they all looked at me really shocked. And I said, listen, you're all in your early 20s or something. You're going to live another 100 years, because with all of the technology, with longevity and so on, you're going to live a minimum to 100, but probably to 120. So now you have 100 years of career in front of you. So and everybody just went back like that. And I said, so you've got to find things that you love, and then you constantly seek for new things that you enjoy, to be able to make a difference and build passion in your life and so on. So, and I find that this is really relevant for young people. Perhaps you have a similar experience.
I mean, when I have these kind of discussions with young people, I always ask the question, okay, do you know? And people normally they don't have an estimate, or they don't have an expectation. But if we imagine how many times a young person today is gonna have to change, to pivot their career, and how many times they're gonna be changing companies, in their lifetime, I think you're gonna come up with a number that is quite high, and it didn't used to be the case, for example, in the past, right? So you don't, nowadays young people, they are, I think they have different expectations versus, I don't know, 10, 20 years ago, even before. So I think they are, on the one hand side, they want to find a meaning in terms of what they do, right? So they serve a purpose. So why am I doing this? Why? What does it bring? What is the added value? Who is benefiting from this, right? And the other thing is that I think that there is a tendency that they get bored if what they do is not attractive enough, or if it's not fast enough, or if it's not creative enough. So the number of times that they're going to be changing direction one way or the other, I think is much, much higher than what it used to be. That's one. And the other thing is because this was always kind of a buzzword. I mean, so let's say, so today, when we end the university, when we end school, it doesn't mean that our kind of education is finished. There are so many developments happening on a daily basis that if you're not able to follow and to educate yourself and to learn new stuff and to go beyond, I think you're going to be having challenges both on the personal and on a professional level.
And I think let's use this as a segue to get into financial services, and then get specifically into fintech, which is a specialized area for yourself. Tell me, what was your earliest? You're a thought leader today. Literally almost 100,000 people on LinkedIn, and I'm sure there are many others on different platforms. So what is there, that specialization that you have right now, as opposed to doing general banking? What took you here?
Yeah, so I think this has to do with just to make the connection with the discussion that we previously had. I think if you are, let's say, working on a domain, and as I said, I started from banking, working for traditional banks, but then the industry is evolving, right? And at some point, as we have seen, technology has changed things, not overnight, but gradually has been changing stuff. And this has had a tremendous impact on how the financial services industry has been addressing the requests of people, the needs of people, right? And if you are in the industry, I think that's something that even if you're not in the industry, that's something that you cannot skip, right? You see this stuff, right? You see that things are changing, and you see that technology has been, as I'd like to say, readdressing and, let's say, the entire value chain. So I was always kind of the person who was trying to understand what is the impact and how the customers are being influenced by this, and what kind of partnerships we might have, and how the technology can influence all these things. So I think it came as a natural kind of evolution for me to, on the one hand side, be the one who was launching partnerships with partners like fintechs, like companies that are adding value on top of the offering. And at some point, I jumped onto the to the other side, right? And I mean, that doesn't mean that, for example, you cannot go back into the let's say a different role, because I think what's happening today is that everything is very, very volatile.
So last week I was a keynote speaker in an international fintech conference, and the first question I asked the audience is, what do you think is the most important thing that's going to define the future of finance and the future of fintech? And I got various answers. Obviously, I got onto AI and so on. And I said, actually, the word is trust. The single most important thing for the future is trust, very closely followed by truth, ethics, and values. And people are quite surprised when they heard that comment. And I gave many reasons for that. What are your views on the trust deficit that we have in the financial world today? And what do we need to do to overcome that? And how do we make it really, really important in our lives?
Yeah, actually, that's a very spot on question. And I think it's very, very relevant, because it's very much connected to a number of discussions that are being going on nowadays in terms of the future of finance. So one of the things that has been happening over the past many years is that because technology has repositioned the importance of infrastructure, nowadays, today, it's all about the front end and not about the back end. It used to be, I mean, if you go many years ago, the infrastructure was the competitive edge of traditional banks. They were the only ones who had it, so nobody could launch easily a competitive service. And now it's exactly the opposite. So now we are discussing about how easy it is to run something and be online in a matter of weeks, in a matter of maybe months, right? How easy it is to and to pivot. So we are in a world that the front end, the relationship with the customer, has been redefining things. So it's not about me providing the service, but it's about the relationship I have with the customer. And this is also a factor of my business. And if I would like to go one step further, it's about trust. So why would somebody work with me? Why somebody would become my customer? Because they trust me. So it goes back to what you mentioned before. So I think this is redefining in a much more powerful way business relationship, especially in finance and in fintech, than it used to do, I don't know, a decade ago.
Yeah, one of the examples that I used was Credit Suisse. Credit Suisse has paid $11,400,126,000, 56 different events of breaking the law over the last 20 years, and we still trust it. And it was bought by obviously UBS. Same thing is happening in the US. You know, my key question is, are we getting completely desensitized and numb to these large organizations? And I was at this conference, I was appealing to people. He said, if people are getting penalties, there's a reason for it. Is they're doing something wrong? And we have to vote with our feet. We have to say, no, we will not put our money in there. No, we will not bank with them. No, we will not go in that direction. Rather than saying, yeah, it's Goldman Sachs, it's JP Morgan, it's Credit Suisse, so they're okay. What do we do to desensitize, to get away from this desensitization?
But I mean, going back to your example, it's exactly the case. You mentioned Credit Suisse, you mentioned SVB, Silicon Valley Bank.
Yeah.
But before I answer your question, I think there was a trigger point when trust was lost. And this was exactly the point that these organizations collapsed. So it was all about trust. So it was about perception of people. So if people thought that their money is safe, as long as they think that their money is safe, everything's working. If there is a rumor and then you go, there is a chain reaction, and then at some point, trust is lost. And that's exactly what happened with both of them. So
It's true that it happened on these two examples, but what I'm saying is, why did Credit Suisse still have so much money in the bank? Silicon Valley is simpler. Why did Credit Suisse have so much money with 11 billion of penalties and fines, which basically means they were not, their governance structure and their value structure was a little bit loose. This is what my key question, not the trigger of it.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I think so. The problems of Credit Suisse, they go back to 2 years ago, and there were several attempts to fix them and to address them, as probably as we can imagine right now, not in a very successful way, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, I would say that's not I think there is no easy answer to this question here. But we all live in I think we live in a world that is every day we get bombarded by news, by information. I mean, I think we are having a difficulty in terms of absorbing this information. And at some point, some of them are prioritized higher, some of them they are lower. We tend to think that big organizations are very hard to fail, very hard to collapse. I mean, the events that we've seen happening over the past years or 15 years, going back to 2008 and the crisis and up to today, I think they show that what we take for granted today can very much be have a different view tomorrow. So we have to be on the lookout always. I mean, there's no
we do, Panagiotis, but what did we learn from 2008? Not one person went to jail. Not one person got into trouble. The government came to salvage. The banks made a lot of money and they were profitable back again. So it was almost business as usual. And they knew that they were actually investing in CDOs and very, very high risk securities. And even people like Goldman were betting against themselves. So I'm not trying to just focus on these big brands, but the philosophy of what I think where digital technology and digital finance and perhaps fintech is going is almost a reaction to a lot of these things because these organizations have now become too big to fail. I mean, that's and that the contagion would be so much that if a Deutsche Bank goes down or if a major institution goes down, it has global impact and so on. So the governments, the central bank, the regulators, everybody come in to block and save that. So my question from there is a pivot into the new kind of digital environments that we need to go in, which you are now an expert in. And you're looking at blockchain, you're looking at fintech. How fast can we move to this new environment for us to feel safe and safe again and feel that this is a fair environment?
I think we have we have to take into account two different things here. So one question is how fast technology can get us there, and the answer might be fairly quickly. But it's not about only technology. It's about us as consumers or as businesses being in a position to make the transition, which is not always easy, right? So that's one. And the second one is about the system being able to absorb the hit and also make the transition from their point of view. And this is about regulation, this is about compliance, right? So when people are asking, okay, we are now moving and we are going from A to B, yes, we have the potential of moving very quickly, but in practice, this is never happening because of all these factors that I mentioned before. I think the system factor is probably one of the biggest kind of hindrances to this and the transition.
I saw a survey a couple of years ago which said, this was for the United States, that only 28% of the people in the United States who were in this survey said that they found that their banks and financial institutions were honest and fair in their dealings with their customers. Only 28%. So literally 72% of the people are saying, hang on, I know my financial institution is not entirely honest and is not entirely fair and they're basically screwing up. Where I want to go from here is the disillusionment for this kind of trust deficit that we have becomes the big opening for fintech and for more transparent environments, for a blockchain environment to create that level of transparency and trust. Is that something that you find is one of the big catalysts to change, or are there other factors?
I think this is definitely one, but on the other hand side, one of the counter arguments that I very often hear, and I think it makes sense a lot. It makes a lot of sense to also put it out and discuss it as well, is that fintechs they tend to be smaller companies, not very well known to the wider audience. So for them, getting trust is not very easy, right? So it depends, and it needs time. So most of the times what's happening is that they need bigger organizations like the traditional incumbents, the banks, the bigger organizations. And what they normally do is that they tend to partner. So one has something that the other one wants or the other one doesn't have. So they kind of join forces. So that has been, let's say, one of the drivers of progressing so far. That doesn't mean, for example, that we didn't have the opposite examples, but again, it's about trust. And just one more point, we're discussing today, there is a very, very huge discussion about the super apps and who is going to become dominant and what's going to happen in Twitter becoming or not, and who is going to be more successful, and Apple launching all these kind of things. So all these things are going back again to trust. So why am I going to use a super app, not only for payments, for transactions, but for many aspects of my life? And the question is simple. First of all, because I trust it, and second of all, because they're building an ecosystem. So everything is pretty much connected to what you mentioned before.
Yeah. So this then becomes one of the big trends to look out in the future. I was about to ask you the question: what are the 3, 4, 5 big meta trends that you see? This certainly is one of them with super apps. You've mentioned Apple, Tencent WeChat. We've got Twitter going into financial space. I think Amazon is going to be running in that direction soon because they already have an ecosystem and outreach also. So do you think that this is one of the big meta trends? And if so, how will it start shaping our lives?
So which one you mean now?
Any one of them, Apple or Tencent WeChat in Asia, and these. In other words, we are now getting more and more dependent in the Apple ecosystem, so it will almost completely control us.
I think we have to make a differentiation. So for sure, one of the big trends that has emerged is about the ecosystems or the platform economy. And I take a very powerful example. So if you look, let's say 10, 12 years ago, if you take a look at the top 10 financial institutions globally, you're going to see most of them were traditional big banks. If you do the same exercise today, you're going to see that 5, 6 of them are platforms. So, and platforms are basically all about the ecosystem approach, right? So it's about being in a position to build something that has several legs, spreads along a very, let's say, wide array of services, and then I'm able to cross-sell and upsell my products in a very broad audience. So I think that's definitely what we are, one of the big trends that is not gonna go away. So I think the ecosystem and the platform approach is probably gonna be the business model for the years to come. So that's one. But I think on the other hand side, because everybody tends to quote Asia and China in particular as to where things might be moving, I think we have to differentiate between what has been happening in China over the past, let's say, 10, 15, 20 years and how the super apps came to power and what is happening in the West. And I mean, and I think this is a long discussion. It's not something that we can easily explain in 2 or 3 minutes, but the macro environment and the circumstances in China were very, very different to what we have in the West. So there's not going to be a one-to-one, let's say, transfer. So we take WeChat and you transfer it to the West and it's working in exactly the same way for many reasons. It's not going to be the case. You're going to have something similar, but similar in the West means that it's going to be a lot lighter in terms of reach and in terms of the setup. We might still call it a super app, and we have some examples, but it's not going to be what people have in mind when they say WeChat, for example, in China.
Some of the other big trends, one of them is obviously crypto, and that's gone through major correction in the last 12 months. And also, I would say, some issues of trust also developing there after FTX. What is your prognosis as far as crypto is concerned? Is it a long-term correction on the way back? How do you see that taking shape, and what are the fundamentals that we should be looking at now?
I mean, we have been discussing about the crypto winter, if you may, right? So that has been, so this is the combination of all these things, FTX, you mentioned a couple of names happening at the same time with the negative macro environment, right? So this has been leading, so the industry as a whole has been taking a hit. I think, to be honest, I think that's a good thing for the industry and for crypto in the midterm to the long term, because there are many weaknesses that need to be addressed. I think, I mean, like volatility, like compliance topic, like the setup, like the user experience and how you approach the users. Many topics. But I think on the mid-run on the midterm to the long term, I think you're gonna see this also taking off. And I think we have also started now seeing that there is a certain improvement in terms of numbers, in terms of the business, in terms of how things are evolving. I think we're still at the beginning. I think there is a very good potential, not necessarily limited only to crypto, but in general, I think blockchain is still, for me, something that we need to have a look at. And now connected with all, now there is a huge AI discussion. I think the combination of these things, because people sometimes tend to think of them individually. So this is here is one and here is the other. No, for me, sometimes, and in many cases, you can combine things. So I think this is gonna bring, it's gonna define basically the next step of the evolution that you're going to see.
So it's interesting you mentioned that. I talk about the convergence of different technologies and they all coming together. And then the stage two is the divergence. And when the divergence comes, what I would call unexpected consequences, things we didn't plan, and they suddenly come out, and new developments happen. Are there any other big trends? You mentioned blockchain. We looked at open banking as an environment. We've looked at crypto, Bitcoin. Anything else that we should be keeping in our minds, and who should be the big players that we should be looking at?
I mean, you mentioned the open banking, and I think this is something that is now being developing and evolving in what we call open finance.
Yes,
so
yes.
Because open banking is kind of tends to be a rather limited approach in terms of maturity. So it's just the beginning. I mean, in Europe, for example, we know it under the legislation of PSD2, but across the globe, it has several forms. So there is a tendency that this evolves to include not only the transactional payments point of view and the information, but it's also gonna include other use cases. So I think that's a clear trend. Embedded finance is another one, which is huge, and everybody is talking about this, and it's also one of my favorites. And actually, it's the idea of being in a position to embed financial services in non-financial services environments.
Yeah.
So basically, you take any customer flow, you take any checkout process, and you embed a financial service that is most of the times running in the background, and it's running so well and it's so deep integrated in the whole process that you don't even understand it. And I think there is an example that everybody can relate to from their day-to-day. Today, you take a taxi. I'm not going to mention a name, but you take a taxi through the app, right? You order the taxi, you get out of the taxi, and the moment actually that you have made the order through your app, a payment has taken place in the background without you realizing. So the moment you get out of the taxi, you don't even have to take out your wallet and make the payment. Everything has been done. So this is an embedded experience. This is an embedded payment, right? So it's one of the big topics on top of what you just mentioned.
No, that's great. I think the whole philosophy, and I call it a hybrid ecosystem in the future. You'll have banks, you'll have fintechs, but also unicorns, the big super apps that we're looking at, and also corporations, plus even small companies. Because with the API capability for a lot of these platforms, we can become an e-commerce company very, very quickly, or a car ride company very, very quickly. So this embedded finance, or that platform environment that we have, is, in my view, really empowering a lot of businesses. And potentially this could change the way we do our financial business transactions. Because I don't think the old systems will last too long. And that's some of the questions I wanted to ask you. Do you think that there's still a space for something like SWIFT? Where I'm paying $30, $40, $50 and I get the money 2-3 days later. How do they survive? I mean, what are the elements of in both traditional banking and new banking? How does SWIFT survive?
So if I remember correctly, SWIFT is so SWIFT exists since 1977. So it's quite an old technology, right? But I think they have around 11,000 banks as members, right? So, and 90% of the cross-border transactions today, they go through SWIFT. Now,
Right.
So this is, let's say, one of the perfect use cases to attack if you are a fintech, if you are somebody who is looking at the opportunities and at things that are not working well. You know, you see SWIFT, you see actually cross-border payments, and you say, here we have something which is expensive, which is not very fast, doesn't have a very good customer experience. So a big opportunity, right? Now, even though this is the case, and even though here we're looking at a technology that is very antiquated and it's quite old and it's not working well, I think it's a global setup. So you have, for example, some fintechs that are trying to attack this using blockchain. So there's a fintech called Ripple, not very successful in terms of the number of volumes that they have been doing so far. You have other ones that have been more successful, like Wise, previously TransferWise. They've actually built an alternative setup. But all these things are good and they're working. But the question is, how much can you move the needle in terms of the volumes? And the answer is that so far, not very much, because it's a global setup. It's not easy to bring all the actors together and all the geographies. And that's why, for example, the discussion around CBDCs has been one that has driving some
What's
of the
CBDC?
So it's the central bank digital currencies. So these are digital currencies that are going to be launched by central banks. And today, for example, 90% central banks around the globe are planning a central bank digital currency. China has launched one. Europe is discussing about announcing one in June, I think, in summer. Huge discussions. So this is part of the reason. So my kind of, to summarize my answer to your question, I think that's an opportunity. It's a very inefficient setup and system. I think we've seen some innovation from blockchain because so over the past 4 or 5 years, they've been launching some more efficient versions of the product. They call it Swift CPI for businesses and Swift Go for consumers, running on data. So it's about improving the data and the information that you get. But there's a lot of room for improvement, and I'm sure that there's going to be many opportunities, but the outcome is far from decided.
So could Apple or Amazon become one of the integration points? I mean, Apple is 1.8 billion cell phones. I don't know, 100 million, iPads and so on, and connected everywhere. And the technologies and the platforms that are now being created are pretty reachable, and the market is ready for disruption, as you have just said. So Apple is a master of disruption, and they work in stealth mode. And whether it's the watch industry or the music industry or the payment industry, they can come in and disrupt that very, very quickly and very large at the same time.
Look, I mean, you have to differentiate between the business side and the consumer side. So if you take the cross-border payments, for example, SWIFT is all about the business side, and Apple is a consumer-facing organization. We have to make this distinction. On the other hand, now with let's take the example of Apple, because you've been using this, and I think it's a very good one. So these guys have been building an ecosystem on top of this 1.8 billion devices that you mentioned, and they do this very well. And they play on two fronts. The first one is the user experience, the integration. Everything is working in a seamless way. They have the hardware and the software. So they're one of the very few players to control both, and not only one. And the second thing is the ecosystem. So it's about what are the services you provide and about the trust, right? Which we mentioned before. So if you put all these things together, then you have a successful recipe. And this is how they have been able to launch, even though they don't want to become a bank, they've been launching kind of and offering banking services on top of banks, on top of Goldman Sachs. They've been offering, for example, now the savings account, and not only this. So it's a good example of how you can innovate.
Which was actually not dissimilar to Ant Financial doing it with Yoibao, their early money market funds that they were creating is micro lending and micro level amounts. Now, moving to the next level and coming to some kind of closure, young people, anybody who was born, let's say, after 1990, maybe in the year 2000 now, which are the Gen Zs that are coming in, they don't recognize banks anymore. Their cell phone is their medium of engagement. They don't expect to physically go to a bank. They have no legacy thoughts. So they are our natural customers. So in 10 years' time, there will be 75% of the people who will be digital natives, millennials, alpha generation, and so on. So isn't it inevitable that we go towards fintech being the predominant space of transaction, and the incumbent banks either have to shift or they'll go out of business?
Actually, we'll make reference to what I mentioned before. It's all about the customer relationship. Who holds the customer relationship, and who is better placed to keep this, or who wants to do this, right? And this is one of the big concerns of banks. If you discuss with banks, this is one of the big concerns. And I think in this respect, you have two choices if you're a bank. Choice number one says that you try to keep the business relationship. And what do? You become a platform, or so you become the provider, and you don't really care if you are servicing products that are coming only from you. So you have to also, in many cases, you also have to integrate products from other providers, but you are still the customer-facing end. So that's one choice. And then you have the other choice. So you are the infrastructure provider. So it's what we call nowadays banking as a service. So the Goldman Sachs, okay, probably these are in terms of the Apple example. Now, in between, you also have variations, right? But the thing is that today, the one who is controlling the customer relationship is the one who is calling the shots. So I don't think that banks are going to go out of business or are going to become irrelevant. The question is how much influence they're going still to keep in this new value chain, and how much they're going to be able to influence things. So because if you're on the back seat, if you don't have the customer relationship, if you're not the one driving the pricing, then if you're not the one who is having the connection with the customer, so the customer knows you, then I think it's a different game. So that's the challenge of banks. I mean, I've seen banks that are now saying that we want to keep this customer relationship in any case. So we
Right.
cannot sacrifice this, but you also have some others, and I think it's a legitimate thing to say that we want to be the ones running the show from the scenes.
Great, thank you. So if we put our focus onto the future, and you are on a platform called Voices of the Future, and you are indeed a voice of the future, but you're presenting that sort of voice today. If you put a message in a bottle today for your children or for the future generations to find the bottle 10 years from now, what will that message say in terms of what we should be ready for and how should we be thinking of the future in, say, 10 years' time? Not 20, 25, 30 if it becomes too long, but say 2030.
Yeah, very good question. Actually, I would answer this the following way. So you cannot predict the future. If you ask me what's going to happen in 5 or 10 years' time, I might be giving you, and I do, for example, I'm giving you some predictions. But if you ask me what's going to be happening in 15 years' time, nobody's able to say, right? So I think this is a given. So the best thing you can do to be able to survive is what what Charles Darwin has said. So you need to be able to adapt, right? It's not about the strongest. It's about the ones who are most able to adapt, right? And I think that's always going to be very, very relevant. So you have to evolve together with the environment, together with what's happening. And here we have going back to and making the connection to what we discussed before. We have the element of trust, right? We have the element of the continuous learning. We have these kind of concepts, right? So I think this is for me crucial.
That's a wonderful answer. One of the key statements that I always make is that the more technological the world becomes, the more human we need to be. So as we get more and more technology, we need more empathy, we need compassion, love, common sense, judgment, heart, soul, spirit, connection, humanity. And I think that human side and the experiential side in the fintech space in terms of product design and user experience is going to become one of the key elements in terms of building our strategy for the future of fintech. And this is some of the stuff that I talk about. Panagiotis, the last point is any message that you would like to, or any comment, your voice to be amplified for the future? Any one thing, apart from the things that you've already said, any one thing that we need to remember to take away from this conversation?
I think a couple of things, a couple of points. The first one is we have to be passionate about what we do, right? We mentioned before, so that's key to success and key to us being what we want to be. And the other one is about trust and how you build trust. So going back to what you mentioned before, and for me, the best way to build trust is to be very, very open in terms of what you expect, and in terms of and very direct to the other side, manage the expectations on a business side and on a personal side. So these are very, very simple things, but believe me, they work in a very, very powerful way.
Thank you. Is there anything that we may have missed? I know we spoke about a lot of issues that you may feel that you'd like to mention that I may have forgotten to ask.
No, just a very last point that I take from your previous comment discussing about the qualities of people. I think now we are in an era where everybody's discussing about AI, artificial intelligence, and how they are overtaking many aspects of our life. And there's a big debate about what will be happening, what kind of decisions are humans going to be still making or not, and who is going to be replacing whom. And at the end of the day, if you enter this discussion, I think the only one quality that can make the difference between, let's say, AI and a human is these qualities that you mentioned, right? So it's the empathy, it's the soft skills. So these are going to be the things that are going to be still here, even in a few years' time. I don't know. I don't want to define how many, that things are going to be looking quite different from today. So this is an investment well worth doing, I think, for everybody, especially for young people.
Panagiotis, it's an absolute pleasure, and I'm very grateful for your time. and for sharing your insights. You are a thought leader in your environment, and we will keep following you and keep supporting each other. So very grateful. Thank you very much indeed for being on Voices of the Future today.
Thank you. A pleasure and a privilege. Thank you.